Calling Edward Mordache a two-faced man would be no insult, as this man, who reportedly lived in the 19th century, had a second face. And yes, it was at the back of his head. A lot of controversy surrounds his existence. It has been argued that Edward Mordache was a figment of a poet's imagination. Charles Lawton Hildreth, who lived in the 19th century, wrote about a man cursed with two faces. Edward Mordache's story is as sad as it is haunting. A man born into wealth was forced into a life of isolation due to his condition. He was heir to one of England's noblest peerages at that time. He remained untitled, refusing to lay claim to the wealth that awaited him. Edward Mordache was a handsome man. That is, if you looked at his natural face. His body was described as being remarkable for its grace. Edward Mordache was also a bookworm, as the accounts called him a profound scholar. He had an ear for music too. We would never find out if his other face was fond of songs. Although the face at the back of Edward Mordache's face was described as that of a beautiful girl, in the words used, lovely as a dream, hideous as a devil, he seemed extremely scared of it. The face was small, occupying less space than his real face at the back of his skull. It was described to exhibit every sign of intelligence, though of a malevolent sort. Whenever Edward Mordache wept, it would be seen to smile and sneer. It is no wonder he begged to have it removed. The face was fitted with eyes that would follow his own movements. It also could speak, although its incessant gibbering was only heard by Edward Mordache. Having a second face was a horrifying experience for the young man. He reportedly could not sleep at night. The voice of the second face would keep him awake with tales from hell. He lamented being attached to a fiend, as he called it. Having a second face affected Edward Mordache's relationship with his family. He was constantly secluded, wishing to suffer alone. He had no friends that were known of, nor did he ever marry. He left no children behind, probably scared at the prospect of passing on such suffering to another human. Edward Mordache begged Manvers and Treadwell, his physicians, to remove the demon face. They refused, fearful of the consequences of such a surgery. In an attempt to end his suffering, Mordache ended his life when he was 23. He gave instructions begging for the second face to be burned, so that it would not disturb him in his grave. So ends the tragic tale of Edward Mordache, the man with two faces. But it is still being debated whether he actually lived, or he was a tall tale that gained life over the years. The first reason there is doubt about his existence is that the story is said to be taken from lay sources. If you were to search for information about Edward Mordache, you would come across an old book called Anomalies and Curiosities of Medicine. It was published in October 1896 by two American doctors, George M. Gould and Walter L. Pyle. These men collected all kinds of bizarre medical cases and put them in one book. They most likely got their information about Edward Mordache's abnormality from an old copy of the Boston Sunday Post. This was the lay source that the book relied on. In the article written by the poet Charles Lawton Hildreth about impossible human anomalies, humans such as a fishwoman, a man-sized spider, and a half-human, half-crab exist, there is no evidence that any of them were real. Charles Lawton Hildreth dubiously claims that his source was the Royal Scientific Society. This would not be mistaken with the Royal Society of London. If this society truly existed, there would be trustworthy references against which his tales of strange humans could be proven. But they do not exist, casting more doubt on the existence of Edward Mordache. Although it is medically possible for a human to be born with a second head or face, Edward Mordache could have been born with a parasitic head of an undeveloped twin attached to the back of his head. This condition is called craniopagus, parasiticus, or craniofacial duplication. But if this was the case, then the twin would have had to be a male. Craniofacial duplication only occurs when there are identical twins involved. The second was described as being that of a beautiful girl. Also, humans born with this condition have not lived into their 20s, as Edward Mordache is reported to have done. Children like Edward Mordache hardly lived to see their 5th birthday. The names of his doctors, Manvers and Treadwell, were missing from the Dictionary of National Biography. They seem only to exist whenever the case of Edward Mordache is mentioned, but never outside these discussions. Mordache never existed. He was born in the mind of Charles Lawton Hildreth and lived through the power of the imaginations of impressionable readers. It has served as the basis of horror stories and medical mysteries compilations. People are intrigued by the